Hello, my name is Jack. Welcome back to my vault. Most people know about the Nazi doctors, the experiments at Auschwitz, the trials at Nuremberg. But there was another program running at the same time, in a different country, on a larger scale. And when the war ended, not one person was prosecuted, because the United States government made a deal. This program ran for 9 years. It employed 3,000 people. It operated in a facility larger than Auschwitz. The prisoners, men, women, and children, were not called patients. They were not called prisoners. They were called maruta. In Japanese, that word means logs. This is Unit 731. And the vault is now open. To understand Unit 731, you need to understand the man who built it. Shiro Ishii was a physician and microbiologist in the Imperial Japanese Army. He was brilliant, he was ambitious, and he was convinced that biological weapons were the future of warfare. In 1932, he persuaded the Japanese military to fund a secret research program in Manchuria, the part of China that Japan had just invaded. His argument was simple. Biological weapons had been banned by international treaty in 1925, which meant, Ishii argued, that every major military power believed they worked. Japan needed them too. His first facility was in the city of Harbin. When 40 prisoners attempted an escape in 1936, all of them were recaptured and killed. He moved the operation to a suburb called Pingfang. What was built there defies description. 150 buildings, 3,000 staff, a prison that held 600 people at a time, a crema to dispose of the bodies, an airport and railway to bring in supplies and people. The official name was the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department. Nobody outside the program knew what happened inside. The experiments conducted at Unit 731 were, by any measure, among the worst acts in recorded history. Prisoners were infected with plague, cholera, anthrax, and typhoid deliberately, without their knowledge, to study how the diseases progressed. They were called maruta because that is how the researchers thought of them, not as human beings, as material. Surgeries were performed without anesthesia, not because anesthesia was unavailable, but because the researchers believed it would affect their results. Limbs were amputated, organs were removed, bodies were opened and closed repeatedly to study infection patterns. Prisoners were taken outside in temperatures of -20 degrees Celsius, their limbs immersed in ice water until frozen solid, and then struck with hammers to test frostbite treatment methods. Others were placed in pressure chambers until their eyes hemorrhaged and organs ruptured. Some were placed in centrifuges and spun until they died. The unit also conducted live field tests. Between 1940 and 1942, Unit 731 dropped plague-infected fleas over Chinese cities and villages. Cholera bacteria were introduced into water supplies and food distributed as aid. Conservative estimates suggest these field operations killed more than 300,000 civilians. When Japan surrendered in August 1945, Ishii gave the order. The Pingfang facility was dynamited. The laboratories were destroyed. The remaining prisoners, several hundred men and women, were executed. Some were forced to hang themselves. Those who refused were injected with potassium cyanide. Every prisoner who had passed through Unit 731 was dead. There were no survivors, no witnesses. Ishii and his staff returned to Japan, carrying the one thing they had managed to preserve: thousands of pages of experimental data, microfilm, tissue samples, the results of 9 years of experiments on human beings. They had a plan for what to do with it. In the fall of 1945, an American biological warfare specialist named Murray Sanders arrived in Japan. His mission was to locate Shiro Ishii and assess Japan's biological weapons program. What Sanders found alarmed him. Japan was years ahead of the United States in biological warfare research. He sent a recommendation to General Douglas MacArthur. His recommendation was simple: do not prosecute Ishii. Make a deal. MacArthur approved it. President Truman approved it. In exchange for the experimental data, the results of everything done to those thousands of prisoners, Shiro Ishii and every member of Unit 731 received full immunity from prosecution. The United States also paid them. Declassified documents show that American intelligence officers made direct cash payments to former Unit 731 members in exchange for their research. The total was between 150,000 and 250,000 yen. The justification was the Cold War. The Soviet Union was the new enemy. Biological warfare data was too valuable to hand over to a war crimes tribunal, and so it was hidden. The Soviet Union held its own trial, the Khabarovsk War Crimes Trials in 1949, where 12 Unit 731 members were convicted. The United States dismissed the trial as Soviet propaganda. Meanwhile, at Nuremberg, Nazi doctors were sentenced to death for conducting experiments on prisoners without consent. The same acts, a different country, a different verdict. What happened to the men of Unit 731 after the war is almost as disturbing as what they did during it. Shiro Ishii opened a private clinic in Tokyo and lived there quietly until his death from throat cancer in 1959. He was never charged, never tried, never publicly identified until years after his death. Masaji Kitano, the second commander of Unit 731, became the founding president of Green Cross Corporation, one of Japan's largest pharmaceutical companies. Green Cross was later implicated in the HIV-tainted blood scandal of the 1980s and 1990s, in which contaminated blood products were knowingly sold to patients, hundreds of whom died. Other Unit 731 doctors became professors at major universities, hospital directors, government officials. One became president of the Japanese Medical Association. One became governor of Tokyo. One became head of the Japanese Olympic Committee. Japan did not officially acknowledge the existence of Unit 731 until 1984, nearly 40 years after the war ended. In 2002, a Tokyo court formally ruled that Japan had engaged in biological warfare. No criminal charges followed. The prisoners of Unit 731, the Maruta, have no memorial, no official acknowledgement from the Japanese government, no compensation for their families. Because there were no survivors, their names are almost entirely unknown. In 2018, the National Archives of Japan released a list of 3,607 Unit 731 personnel. The names of the prisoners were not included. They were logs. That is how the records remember them. At Nuremberg, the world established that there are crimes so severe, experiments on human beings without consent, that no military order, no government authority, and no scientific justification can excuse them. The doctors who did those things in Germany were hanged. The doctors who did those things in Manchuria became hospital directors and Olympic Committee members. The difference was not the crime. The difference was the deal. The vault for Unit 731 is now locked, but the next secret is already waiting. Subscribe to enter the vault. My name is Jack. Keep your eyes open.